Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We will now proceed with the first session for the day. The speakers for this session are Mr. Gilbert Tan, CEO of the Employment and Employability Institute, Singapore, Dr. Hao Zhang, Assistant Professor, Department of Labour Relations, School of Labour and Human Resources, Renmin University, China, and Ms. Vidisha Mehta, Principal, Talent Strategy Practice Leader for Asia, Mercer. The session will be chaired by Professor Sarosh Kuruvilla, Andrew J. Nathanson, Family Professor of Industrial Relations, Asian Studies and Public Affairs, Cornell University, United States. I now hand over to Professor Kuruvilla.
Welcome everybody. So we have the overall description and conceptual ideas about what is India's skills development program, and hopefully this session will give us a little bit of details to fill in, to flesh out the various issues that Dr. Krishnan talked about, and this is for the rest of the conference. We are talking about little bits that are filling in to different areas in the system. So our first speaker is Mr. Gilbert Tan. We heard the words employability in Dr. Krishnan's speech, and so here we're going to sort of hear about what that really means when you enact it on the ground.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. First of all, maybe before I even begin, let me run a bit about what the Employment and Employability Institute is. The E2I, college for short, is a tripartite entity formed with the employers, the government, and the unions to come together to focus on employment and good jobs and employability, giving skills to do those jobs in Singapore. We're set up as a private entity, right smack in the space between employers, workers, and the government. Operate government programs to mobilize the workers to meet employer needs. So what I'll do today is I'll cover a bit quickly about the changing demographics, the changing economy in Singapore, how that really impacts us, and some of the challenges we see. I'll run through that quickly in this portion. Then I'll cover a bit about the skills landscape in Singapore. What is happening, what has been done so far, where are the changes we've come through so far, and then maybe seek some ideas for discussion on what we can possibly do way ahead to make sure that we are up to speed in really check the changes without the first changes. So demographically in Singapore, and I guess it's happening all over the world, we are aging population, we're getting older and older, the median age will increase and will continue to increase. And I guess in Singapore, we'll face it in a more acute situation because of our small population. Mentioned earlier, there's a huge interest for degrees, degree programs. While that is changing, but this is a problem we face globally. In Singapore, we are trying to put in place programs to prevent or to at least slow down this. We see now 44% with postgraduate qualifications, with degree qualifications, but I think going forward, it could be worse. We've not even accounted for private degrees, which will account for a bigger proportion of our workforce. GDP growth has been a problem in Singapore. We have seen positive growth year on year. It's come down from highs to 1 to 2%. However, this GDP growth in Singapore is a lot of it is contributed to by labour growth. And if you contribute by labour productivity, not productivity growth, then we've got a problem, because then that will suppress wages. It's just pure manpower growth. And with a small country, small limited space, we will face social problems related to this. So how do we up the value of jobs, up the value of productivity, focus on a slightly tighter but leaner but a more professional workforce? That's a challenge that Singapore needs to focus on. Another area is the employment rate. We have kept it low, so I think internationally 2 to 3% is pretty good. But however, this accounts still for tens of thousands of people without jobs. So from the job seekers' point of view, I'm the ones without a job. Then really, how do I get the skills needed? How do I acquire the skills needed to get a job? And in the fast-paced, changing environment that we laid out earlier, for the employers, how do I get workers in this really tight labour market? Where do I get the workforce that I need to do my job? But however, even in such a tight labour market in Singapore, we do see unemployment. We have redundancies of about almost 20,000. And I think that redundancies will increase. Over this year and next year, maybe we will see unemployment creep up. And I think we will really then, as a small nation, think about what we need to do to put in place programs to prevent or to help people who are transiting through redundancies and helping them guide these transition workers to move into new skill sets which will keep them employable in the longer term. And of course, our long-term unemployment rate. This is probably tracked by most nations in the world. Our long-term unemployment rate and the re-entry rate is beginning to show signs of taking longer to find jobs and taking longer to get back into the workforce. And so this sets the stage and the context for what we are doing in terms of skill development, in terms of getting people jobs. Because we do believe that skills should end up in jobs to make full use of those skills. So let me run a bit more about the skills landscape in Singapore. We do have a very, very established pre-employment training sector, ranging from our primary schools, secondary schools, to the Institute of Higher Learning, which includes our IT, polytechnics, and universities. So Bruce and Renmin from the IT are here will share more later on. However, coupled with that, we have been putting in place a CET system for Singapore. It started off more than 10 years ago with a National Skills Recognition System, which progressed to a WSQ, the Workforce Skills Qualification System. And today is in place a reasonably vibrant, privately provided sector with a number of providers that provide specific vocational-based training as well as horizontal-based training to make sure that our workforce is skilled. So in Singapore then, the way a typical worker goes about is to go through training in school, and then they hit the workforce, and then they continue training at the city centre in their own workplaces, if the workplaces are big enough for that. And in 2015, to better organize this whole space, the Skills Future initiative was formed. I'm sure you have heard about what Skills Future is. Skills Future provides a lot of things to a lot of people, ranging from as early as career guidance to help guide people into which jobs and which skills you will need for those jobs, to programs that bring people into those jobs. It could be earn and learn programs, it could be funding schemes to enable learning in Singapore. So many of these schemes are funded, and even the national skills learning system called the Skills Future Credit has been rolled out to encourage skill development in Singaporeans throughout the nation. And to make this happen, our government agency that deals with jobs and skills, previously called the Workforce Development Agency, has been split into two. One called the Skills Future Singapore, reporting under the Ministry of Education, to focus on skills future and develop skills in Singapore. And the second one, the Workforce Singapore, focusing on jobs and employment, reporting under the Ministry of Manpower. So with these two in mind, then there's opportunities now to focus on skill development, getting people jobs and employment, and making sure that our workforce and our people have proper jobs, better jobs, that they can pay wages to live a better life in Singapore. However, in the midst of all that, we do significant structural shifts, and we alluded to earlier in some of the questions and the discussion earlier, on shifts that are happening globally. And we have gone through various cycles economically. We've seen technology disrupting a lot of jobs, and it's not just every job becoming an IT job, but having digitalization, digital technologies infiltrating every job in the world globally. And in Singapore, we see uneven growth. We see trade statistics coming out of the Ministry of Trade doing very well, but if you talk to many of the employer associations, they will face challenges too. So with differential profitabilities and competitiveness among our industries and our employers, how do we chart this employment landscape and the skill development landscape for our workforce? This slide, I don't need to go into too much. Many of the technologies are changing the jobs. Many jobs that we are seeing today are not even common. I've got a teenager son, and some of his classmates want to be full-time YouTubers, which you ask any adult will be wondering, is that a real job? No? But people are eager to do this sort of job. So what is it next that we need to think about, and how do we keep pace with this change? The change used to take tens of years to 5 to 10 years, and now I think it's changing even quicker. So how do we keep pace of these new jobs, these new technologies, and the skills that are needed to not just operate at a basic level to do well in these areas. And also, of course, in Singapore, we are seeing the growth of the gig economy, freelancers, self-employed. Some of them are really by choice, but there's a percentage below whether it is not a preferred choice. So how do we help people in the gig economy, freelancing, who are forced there by circumstance, not by choice? Is it a matter of skills? Is it a matter of employment or other gaps that are in place? And these are things that keep us busy at night. Borrowing a slide from our Minister for Manpower, he says that for employment, there are two types of issues that we need to deal with. One is labor mismatch. Of course, we're all very familiar with that. Job, skills, and wages mismatch. Job could be the job there, but none of our people are able to do that. Skills mismatch, we have people but don't have the skills for that job. Or even wage. We may have the job, but the employers are not willing to pay the wage that Singaporean or local workers are interested in doing actually. On the other side, with the changes in technology, changes in disruption, and things getting so fragmented, we've got a problem of mismatches, where we may have the workforce with the skills, the jobs that are available, but they do not happen to meet each other. And it's surprising, even in small places where this happens. So how do we deal with these two things as important? And to prepare for the future economy, our Prime Minister has been laying out various plans, and even again this recent National Day rally, he spoke about the need to be digital for Singapore to move. He used really commonplace examples that some may think trivial, but it hints to the fact that digitalization is going to impact every single part of our lives, our work, our lives. So later on today, in fact, the Minister for Higher Education and Skills in Singapore will be launching a program to prepare the entire workforce to be digitally ready. There's going to be a foundational module launched today at the Lifelong Learning Institute in Singapore. It's called the Skills Future for Digital Workplace. So at the base level, what we hope to do is to bring everyone up to a certain level of awareness and comfort to deal with technology. Technology can be a very good thing, but could also be a very divisive thing if it results in the society being split. Those who know and can, and those who cannot and are afraid of it. So how do we bring everyone on the same page to be comfortable and to be able to use digital technologies? So later on today, we will launch this program. And of course, from the economy perspective, we've launched a committee for future economy. And this committee focuses on how we chart Singapore's growth, economy and growth in the future. And one of the key outcomes or key proposals of this committee is that we need to have industry transformation maps. There are 23 of these maps across key jobs, key sectors that will account for at least 80% Singapore's working population jobs. So with this in place, each transformation map will chart out where we are today, where we hope to be in the future, and what are the changes in terms of skills, in terms of jobs, in terms of productivity that is needed. And hopefully within these maps, also have charts on how do we get from here to there. It's easy to put in place a map, probably the devil's in implementation details. So how do we move from here to there, and how do we move the tripartite partners coming together to get these maps implemented? So if there is a map, if there is a skill framework, then the next question in mind specifically to develop the skills, and how do we ensure these skills are given to our workforce? So traditionally, learning is very independent. I go to school on my own, and on my own. Text-based, we go to textbooks, we go to materials that have been handed down from lecturers to students. It's classroom-based. Traditionally, I go to a classroom, I have to go to a classroom. In Singapore, which is small, it's not a big one, but in a bigger country where the geographical divides, then it's a challenge. It's the traditional degree route. You go to primary school, secondary education, you go to college, get a degree, and then you go to work. And then the traditional thinking that I study before I work. So it's traditionally, that's what people do. We go to school, we stop the first 14, 16 years of our lives, and then we think that we made it, we throw our hats up in the air, we graduated, and we start working. And for the rest of our life, we just work. But however, this has to change, considering the landscape I discussed earlier and the skill needs that we described earlier. So what have we changed? We have moved from classroom-based fixed learning to online blended workshop. Taking parts of the classroom modules, which used to be 3-4 years long, cut into 6-month modules, And then we put some of these online, we call it a method program, call it online program. Incorporate the use of multimedia instead of pure text. Now media is used as one of the teaching forms, The use or the incorporation of internships and apprenticeships, work, learn sort of initiatives into the training program of the person. And of course, the advancement of CET, continuing education, using workshops and seminars. So a typical engineer, for example, keeping your engineering certifications, you need to go for regular workshops to accumulate your continuous professional development hours to keep a certification. But however, is this enough? I think that's something which we need to have been talking to workers, talking to employers. Some of these things are still facing a challenge. Number one, the workers that are working today lack time to train. Primarily because of in Singapore, the tight labour market, we are really pushing everyone to work really hard. So there's very little time to train. And one of the common complaints, or not complaints, feedback we hear from the unions is that my employers do not allow me time to go and train. Again, I'm generalizing, but it's a common complaint. Lecturers having limited knowledge. Well, no offense to any lecturer in this room, but knowledge is changing fast. So do we deliver the knowledge that we know today, or what else can we acquire? So a professor may know a lot about a certain topic that is familiar, but today to succeed in a certain work, I may need to know many horizontal associated skill sets which my own professor may not know. So how do we help someone to acquire that? Speed to market. Things change so fast, especially in the areas of new digital and technology. In cybersecurity moves faster than most training programs can keep up. The area of safety, security, a lot of these things move really quickly. And knowledge is growing faster than what they're used to. So how do we provide a system that enables people to learn the most immediate and the most pressing needs of industries? Knowledge changes, and of course, the last point, too many distractions. There's so much distraction today where it comes in the form of a mobile phone, a tablet, which beeps you all the time to do something. I'm sure in this hall in the morning, there are many beeps coming for various reasons. It could be news articles telling you about things happening. So in Singapore, sometimes we have train disruptions. It could be a game prompting you that your life is full, please play something about. So things distract us all the time. Amidst all the lack of time, moving skill sets, things distract. How do we help people learn, pick up skills better? And again, talking to people who are learning, what do they hope? So if I throw a question out to the people who are in classes, what do they hope to have? Number one, they hope that learning can be on the go. I don't have to go to a place, I don't have to go to a certain website at a certain time when the workshop is going on the go. And it has to engage me. It's always on. Content is bite-sized, it keeps me all the time. Small little snippets that helps me digest, understand. It could be when I'm on my way to work in the MRT, in the train system. It could be when I'm on the phone, home in the morning before I go to work. It could be before I go to bed. So what things it could be? It could be on demand. When times when I'm busy at work, I maybe don't get involved with it. Times when I've got more time, I'm involved with it. So it can anytime, anywhere, and really up to me when I need it, when I want it, how do I want it. Knowledge preferably could be also crowdsourced. Because, for example, if something happened, so about a couple of months back, we had a construction failure in Singapore, in Changi area, where a partially built viaduct collapsed. So how do we extract learning from that one incident? In terms of engineering, in terms of continuity planning, in terms of safety control. So then how do we keep knowledge crowdsourced? And if we depend on teachers to teachers, we may not get a crowdsourced information. With crowdsourced funding, how do we get crowdsourced knowledge, crowdsourced learning? And of course the last one, gamification. If I can get the learning content, the learning system to challenge me in little bite size. So I'm not sure about India, but in Singapore, there were a period of times when we were caught up with Pokemon. Catching Pokemon all over the nation, and I see my colleagues and workers catching Pokemon even during meetings. So we trying to block gaming websites. Before that was Candy Crush. And all these come in little challenges that just push you a little bit beyond what you are able to do. So can learning take a pace where push you to learn a little bit more than what you have today and continue to learn. I know gamification sounds a bit trivial, sounds a bit gimmicky, but I think the theories and the content behind it could maybe result in a system that could build addiction to learning in people. So with all this in mind, then I think one of the things, I have volleyball questions that answers, really a little on what to learn. So what to learn, how do we put in what to learn? Would the the schools know best? Would the employers know best? Would the workers who already know what they are today know best? So how do we engage all three groups into a system of feedback and iterative system where everyone can continually fine-tune what to learn? Traditional school councils may be useful. Employer associations that are facing business challenges every day will be useful. But what to learn is something we need to think about. And in Singapore also we are wondering, as we build the industry transformation maps that take into account what to learn, how do we get enough information about what to learn from both the employer groups, the worker groups, as well as the government groups, forecasting for the future. When to learn? Can we put in place systems where people can really get involved in learning when and where they want to? So our traditional schools, our training institutions, our CET institutions today require people to go to learn at a certain time. Where to learn? Maybe go to a certain place to learn, or it could be online, but still a certain place to go to. So is there a way we can change learning to make it, and change learning to change skills development to make it anywhere, anytime? And of course, how to learn? How do we put in place? And I think we are in the midst of trying to figure out some of these challenges and how do we develop platforms that enable continuous learning all the time, a bit of gamification involved, and hopefully by the later part of this year we can launch something that could garner all these contents and try out something that may change the world. Hopefully by see you all next year, we have more things to share about this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilbert. So, this E2E is one more evolution of a long list of evolutions in Singapore's avatars of skills development. And so this is a country that has a tremendous national, concerted national effort on skills. Now we're going from here to China, and in terms of the differences in skills development from given India and China, is that in India, people like Dr. Krishnan, who are sitting there, the architects of the policy, tended to know the problems, they sort of articulate a great policy, but the problem in India is how it's implemented down the line. So that's the key issue. In China, it's the reverse. There is absolutely no problem in implementing down the line because once the state moves, it moves. The bigger problem is, thinking about what is to be done and how to do it. And I'm hoping that Dr. Hao Zhang is going to sort of talk to us about how the Chinese are thinking about this issue.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Hao Zhang, Assistant Professor of Renmin University of China. I'm happy to be here today to share some of the experience about the latest reform on skill development in China. And also I'm happy to learn from you guys about experience in India and Singapore. So this is a general landscape of the Chinese skill formation system. As you can see, a person can possibly enter the stage of vocational education at about 15 years old. And there are generally two types of vocational schools in China. The first type is the so-called vocational schools owned by the Ministry of Education, the MOE, and the other one is the technical schools owned by the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security, which is the Ministry of Labor. And these two types of vocational schools constitute the so-called VET system in China and will be the focus of my presentation today. So just bear in mind that a general feature in the Chinese VET system is this division of administration between the MOE and what we call the MORS, the Labor Ministry. So this is further to show the number of schools and teachers and students that each administration has in China in general and in Guangdong, which is the area that I focus my research on. You can see that the MORS own relatively fewer schools and train relatively few students each year, but still they own a lot of them. So why this topic is really important, the VAT system has been gaining really growing importance in the latest reform agenda of the Communist Party for a number of reasons. Firstly, you can see that vocational schools during the past decade have been generating increasingly more and 4 times as many as what academic colleges do. And vocational school graduates account for almost 80% of the newly added urban workforce and more than half of the newly added second and the tertiary sector workforce. And these numbers were only 51% and 21% 10 years ago. And the VAT system has recently become a focal point of the Chinese economic reform. You guys probably know that China has been experiencing slowing economic growth in recent years, which has prompted the government to promote industrial restructuring and upgrading, which further entails upskilling of the Chinese workforce. Right? In light of that, the 2 ministries, the Mercer and the MOE, has each launched an independent reform apprenticeship. So interestingly, instead of collaborating with each other, they are reforming this area by themselves without any coordination. So they are enforcing 2 different apprenticeship systems in their own schools. So I employed field research in 2 areas. In Beijing, this is the capital city of China, where I have interviewed policymakers as well as asking them to establish contacts for me to do further research on schools and firms in Guangdong, which is the sort of reform frontier in China during the past 4 decades economic reform. So I have identified apprenticeship programs in industries in the traditional manufacturing sector, in the modern service sector, as well as the modern manufacturing sectors and their overlapping areas. So in this presentation, I will just focus on 3 industries: rubber manufacturing, beauty, and the auto maintenance. So in all of these sectors, we have seen in recent years tremendous demand of the employers for upskilling the workforce, for high-skilled workers. For example, in the beauty sector, in especially the Guangdong area that I studied, the beauty sector has experienced very rapid growth in recent years, largely because this is the most economically advanced area in China, and when consumers have money, they try to put them into the service sector. They demand for higher quality of modern service. But this rapid growth has been impeded by a major labor shortage also in this area. So according to one of the survey that we did in Guangdong, 83% of the firms have reported that they have encountered labor turnover and shortage problems, and 77% of them therefore resorted to vocational schools to tackle this problem. And if you compare what the beauty workers' monthly wages, it's much more than twice as much as what the local minimum wage requires employers to pay. Another really important indicator for the general labor shortage in Guangdong. And some of the leading firms therefore seek to sort of upgrade the local beauty industry, trying to target a relatively high end of the market. And one of the important agendas of theirs is to collaborate with vocational schools to upgrade the skill level of the workforce. The rubber manufacturing sector has similar demand, but are in a different circumstance. So first of all, this is the emerging so-called Industry 4.0 sector, right? The local government in Guangdong are trying to revolutionize the local industries through promoting the manufacturing of rubbers and also promote the local manufacturing sectors to employ more and more rubbers in order to tackle the problem of labor shortage. So based on a 2015 survey, there were already 159 major rubber manufacturers in Guangdong, And they are also more and more, the robots that they produce are being introduced into all these workshops in different sectors to replace traditional operational workers. So in 2014, there were 23,000 robots employed in Guangdong workshops, having replaced 151,000 workers, and these numbers became 41,000 and 269,000 in the next year. And then the local government expected to employ 300,000 robots in Guangdong workplaces by 2020. That will replace almost 2 million traditional operational workers in the area. Robots also revolutionized the production process, but also calls for a restructuring of the skill sets of the workforce, right? So based on local labor ministry's estimation, after introducing robots into a traditional assembly line, operational workers will be reduced by 19%, whereas technicians who will be engaged in operating, maintaining, programming for these robots will be increased by 17%. And also, another reason for all these robot manufacturers to motivate them to engage in upskilling of the workforce is that there is a major failure of the so-called external labor market, because this is a brand new sector, right? All these technicians have to be newly trained just for this industry. They are not traditionally available in the labor market. You can't simply find easily a technician from the external labor market that can operate robots, right? So they have to collaborate with vocational schools to train these workers by themselves. For the auto industry, this is the traditional sector, except for the general problem of labor shortage that has been striking this area. Brand name auto firms, car makers are particularly interested in collaborating with vocational schools to train maintenance workers, because maintenance workers compared to assembly line operators need actually more comprehensive skill sets in order to be qualified for a maintenance man, right? You have to be familiar with every single part of the car model, as opposed to a traditional assembly line worker that only need to focus on his or her little teeny procedure of the production process. So as a comparison, a maintenance worker needs 3 months initial training in order to be qualified to start his work as a maintenance man. In comparison, only 1 week initial training is needed for assembly line worker. And also, brand name car makers are very interested in collaborating with vocational schools in order to equip these trainees their brand-specific skills, right? So a Volkswagen car model can be very different from a Toyota car model. So they do need workers that are really familiar with all the car models in order to be a qualified Audi maintenance man. So they can incorporate 20% firm-specific training in schools' curricula if they collaborate with vocational schools. So the two ministries, I just said, they have competing reform systems, but they are employing very different approaches to instituting all these apprenticeship programs in their own schools. For example, the Ministry of Education has employed a very decentralized model. So in their central policy, they only have specified general principles and offer subsidies to the local government. The local MOE diffused their authority to schools and firms. So the dominant model in this case is that individual schools find their single collaborative employer as their partner, and they are based on this training program and the curriculum development on this individual school firm partnership, using school state subsidy, but the state doesn't have any intervention in the development of their curricula. So So this is a very decentralized model, whereas the Mercer has employed a very centralized model. They have very detailed central policy roadmaps and use quota to manage this entire process, and the local Mercer just follow all these central guidelines and have even more specific provincial policies. And they command firms to purchase certain kind of training from their schools, and they use a national vocational certificate system to guide the curriculum development in these schools, and there's no customization of the curriculum based on what this individual firm would need for the training. So this is a very centralized model, and the problem really lies in the national vocational certificate system, which is run by the Central Ministry of Labor, and are complained by a lot of the employers and schools for not being able to accommodate regional specificities as well as industrial specificities in China. So employers do not recognize those certificates, so they don't really like the training that are based on those systems, because they don't think the skills are what actually are needed in our workplaces. So if we need a toolkit for evaluating sort of the two systems, we have three important indicators. The first one is employer participation. There is an underlying free rider problem, so we want to encourage more employers to participate in order to get rid of potential free riders. And the second one is employer satisfaction, meaning the training agenda should be able to accommodate industry needs, right? And then even if some training program can be really welcomed by employers, they may fail to achieve a balanced delivery between general and specific skills, meaning if it only customized for one single employer, it can be over-focused on that single firm's specific skill needs, but overlook general skills training, which will weaken, undermines workers' employability and long-term labor market development. So I will just present two cases in the auto sector. So the first one is the labor ministry, the centralized model in the Toyota firm. So they have a very, what I call formalistic apprenticeship training because the central government requires each of the company to offer 100 apprentice positions in a year or two. So even a big firm without fast expansion cannot afford that many apprenticeship positions in a year or two. So they have to select workers from their original workforce. Their employees already working in the firm. They have selected 50 existing workers and budgeted 100,000 yuan. About over half of the budget will be state subsidized. But this policy conflicts with the already existing local policy which already subsidize individuals who purchase this kind of training in Guangdong. So you can see this centralized model doesn't really work well, also because it doesn't accommodate local differences, right? So they have two modules in this training program. The school part are just exclusively focused on general skills training based on that national vocational certificate system, as I just mentioned. And the firm part is very formalistic because these are their employees already. These are not real apprentices, right? So the on-the-job training part is not really what apprenticeship training is needed in this case. So throughout my interviews, I heard triple complaints from both the local labor bureau. They were very anxious because the firm has filed a proposal by mid-2016, and Toyota was also regretful for participating in this because they think this national vocational certificate system-based training is very useless for them. And there are many other employees that are actually eager to participate, but they think the rigid policy that asks them to offer 100 apprenticeship positions has already excluded those small and medium-sized firms who are actually in much demand for this kind of state-subsidized training. Right? So if we look at the MOE, the Ministry of Education's case, it's a driver and drivers apprenticeship program. It's a different scenario. So they had school firm collaboration since 2012 through establishing collaboratively practical centers, curriculum, textbook development, teacher training, and also the firm sent firm teachers to teach in the school, and the state subsidized a lump sum subsidy, meaning you don't have to use this money for specific purpose. Just give you a lump sum subsidy to use for whatever you need in terms of running the program, which is also different from the labor minister's case, right? So they have 30 apprentices enrolling in 3-year program every year, and they have 3 different modules. The first one is school-based, supposed to be general skills training, and then the second year will be based on the practical centers, focused on firm-specific skills, and then the third year are firm-based, basically is the internship program, and focused on job-specific training. And the sustainability of this program is also much better than the labor minister's case. They have already conducted 5 cycles with over 150 apprentices, and these are high-skilled jobs because they're training for maintenance men as opposed to assembly line workers, right? However, there's also a problem with this very decentralized model. As I said, this is the dominant model because the labor minister's case approach is not that successful. So most of the apprenticeship programs nowadays in Chinese vocational schools are these MOE's model that are based on individual firm and school collaboration. This kind of program has a problem of inconsistency across programs in terms of curriculum, right? So I have coded 10 major beauty programs in Guangdong area, and you can see that that most of the programs focus their effort on firm-specific training, right? So they customize their curriculum based on their individual collaborative firms' needs, with also overlooking general and industry transferable skills. And these 3 ones are particularly so because they are the apprenticeship programs. So they are exclusively focused on firm-specific skills training, and there is no coordination across the different programs. There is no centralized skill standards that they follow. So just a summary of the 2 ministries' reform. These are early outcomes that I have observed in Guangdong. In terms of employer participation, you can see the MOE has been much more successful in terms of instituting programs and encourage employer participation. In terms of employer satisfaction, the MORS has received triple complaints, whereas the MOE's programs are welcomed by employers. But neither of them has done a very good job in terms of delivering balanced general and specific skills. The MORS programs, based on that national vocational certificate system, are exclusively focused on general skills training, right? And then MOE's program are extremely customized based on individual collaborative firms' needs and are therefore only focused on firm-specific skills. So 2 simple conclusions. The Chinese state has been trapped in the dilemma with regard to skills development reforms. So neither a decentralized, nor a centralized model has been able to deliver ideal skill development outcomes until effective civil society governance emerges and functions to coordinate the training process across different programs, to establish some standards at the industry level, what we do need for a particular location for particular jobs, to have some sort of common place for these programs to base their curriculum on. The VET system is unable to deliver ideal skill development outcomes. This presents a challenge to the state's long-term upskilling agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hao. It's very rare for those people who work in the skills development area to actually see empirical grounded research that looks at how programs are working, because it comes up with very clear indications of why a program is not working well and what to do about it. Our next speaker is Vidisha Mehta, Senior Principal and Talent Strategy Practice Leader for Asia Mercer. And you know, when we have a saying in academics, when all else fails, we go to the consultant. So, so we're hoping for some great lessons from you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kuruvilla. And true to consultants, I come with some very fancy slides. Hopefully, a few ideas which are a blend of a systematic level exposure that we've had the privilege of having as a firm with Skills Future Singapore. There are also some personal experiences having come through the educational system in India, having actually worked in India and in Singapore. So a very, well, I'd say humble attempt to try and see what may be some things that are actually transferable, given the huge differences between the two systems and the two countries. So let me just start with, we've talked a lot about the fourth industrial revolution. What I'd probably like to focus upon is just a few things that we see practically happening in terms of the workplace in Singapore. We talk about the impact of mobile cloud technology, big data, etc. Sometimes it can stay at a very abstract level. An example of this is I had the opportunity to meet a very senior representative from the Public Service Division, that is Prime Minister's office, from the Prime Minister's office in Singapore. And they were talking about their hiring practices. And what they've been doing in the last 6 months is they've actually introduced a new step of a video CV, as they call it, right? Because what they would find is that they had fantastic looking profiles that would come to them. And then they would have to coordinate across 3 very senior level stakeholders to put together a panel for an interview. And then when they met the person, they figured within the first 2 minutes that they were not going to be able to hire them. So the practical challenges of doing that really drove them to say, hang on, let's get this video CV process in so that at least we know at the basic level there are certain needs we have in terms of the presentation and the ability to communicate and all of those things, which we can test and see before we even invest so much time in just putting together a panel to conduct an interview. So that was an interesting one that we see happening today. The other piece of work, when we talk about longevity, aging societies, Gilbert's touched a bit about that. As a firm, we've had the privilege of working with the Singapore National Employers Federation. And this is particularly in the area of hospitality and the food services sector, where you have a lot of the Asian workforce that goes in. And so if you go to some of the chain restaurants around, you would find that the average age of the wait staff is usually over 50 years old. And you've got these snazzy iPads through which you can put in your orders directly. And obviously this is heavy work for people. And a lot of what the SNEF is attempting to do is really in terms of hiring us to redesign these jobs. Something as simple as how do you make the font size bigger on that iPad so that somebody is not going like, how do I make out what's on the menu? And simple trainings and simple job redesign so that it becomes easier for the workforce to be able to perform these jobs for a longer period of time. The AI and robotics, may seem very futuristic, but I guess all of you who are in Singapore would probably have read the press about OCBC's chatbot. They've removed a lot of the admin part of HR, which is basic, answering questions about how much leave balance do I have? What is our policy on, education support? And they have a system called the Buddy system, and it's a deep learning system. So the more people interact with it, it kind of gets a more sophistication. And I've interacted with the system, and it would be difficult for you to tell that you are talking to an artificial intelligence. So it is getting just more and more sophisticated. And that really brings us to the question of, in an environment like this, is our thinking about skills really going to stand that test? And so the other piece of work that we do is with the World Economic Forum. And this comes from a Future of Jobs report that the WEF launches every few years. And it talks about the number of jobs or the kind of jobs that are actually going to reduce in the next 5 years. And that's not very far away. This is actually just now a 3-year horizon. But what we're seeing is worldwide, a lot of jobs around manufacturing, production, construction, extraction, basically a lot of the lower level, mechanical jobs, so to speak, are going to go away. But it's not necessarily all bad news, because there is also an increase of jobs, right? And while some of these may seem out of the reach of a lot of people, it flows down the line. When we talk about computer and mathematical, not all of these are massively complex jobs. But it is really, a simple person who was operating a machine up till yesterday will need to now understand a little bit of programming about, hang on, if this is automated, how do I do some basic troubleshooting with it? When do I know that I need to just do a system restart? When do I actually call in my service provider to say, this is a big problem and we need to get it fixed? So that level of training on working with technology is finding its way more and more into pretty much all of the jobs that we see. Now, when we talk about the underlying skills then that you need to actually perform these jobs effectively, the interesting part about skills is over the last 20 years across public-private sectors, there has been a lot of focus. So it went from broad skills to very specific narrow skill definition. And then the challenge that came up was these skills are not really transferable. The more specialization you have, it does become sometimes that challenge of super specialization. And hence we're going back to broad-based skills that are transferable in nature. And so again, from the same study, what you see is that skills around critical thinking, creativity have increased significantly. And almost everything that you see up here is not a basic mechanical skill. It needs either a cognitive or an emotional kind of intelligence to be able to be effective in these skills. And hence, part of the work that we're doing with the Singapore government, while very clearly focused on the technical skills, is also trying to see what are some of the generic skills, like working with technology, like making sense of complex systems, that we want to build at a foundational level to ensure that you can add the technical skills or layer it on top of that. So that's really from a what's changing in the world point of view. The other view that we look at is also the supply side of things, and what is the quality of human capital that's actually coming out of various countries. Now again, the methodology of the studies and the metrics, there may be some debate across it. But from a pattern, what we see, and this is just world rankings on the Human Capital Index, which again the World Economic Forum puts out. It's an index which is basically a combination of the ability of the countries to produce, as in develop and deploy human resources. And what you can see is clearly a stark difference. I mean, Singapore sits at number 11. There is a huge benefit to having a homogeneous political system and a small population. I don't think we can go away from that. And therefore, a lot of the policy has been implemented in a far more effective manner. And Singapore has actually consistently moved up the rankings. You see, India is at 103 there. It's also moved up the rankings in the last few years. But obviously, changes are a little difficult to make at that level of scale and complexity, which you've heard of during the morning sessions. So what I'm going to just try to do is see a little bit about what can be applied from Singapore. And as someone who came in from a system where the education system and the employment system didn't really talk to each other, at least in my experience while I was in India, it struck me how differently things were run. So I'll probably just focus a little bit about those as personal experiences. Gilbert's touched on the industry transformation maps. The importance of these you actually cannot underestimate, because it forms a coherent basis for all of the policy design as well as program design. So what at the final aim is to drive that increase in productivity, in innovation, and not just have great domestic results, but have Singapore as be the hub for this part of the world in terms of an international workforce. that is what drives really all the skill development programs. And skills and jobs therefore get focused on what we call an industry manpower plan, which comes from that industry transformation plan. And there are 20 plus of these, one for every significant industry that Singapore would like to be a regional leader in. So it just shows that there's a lot of focus and coherence in the way the planning is happening. The IMP starts with really a manpower study, and it goes right down to just saying what is the demand for a certain kind of skill, certain kinds of jobs in the next 5 to 7 years. It looks at the supply side of things in terms of the IHLs, the Institutes of Higher Learning, how many graduates, what kind of graduates are they going to produce in the next few years. It is interestingly also an input into the immigration policy. And so you can see that a lot of decisions get made based on that manpower plan of what Singapore would like to see itself strong in. It goes on to then skills adequacy, relevance, careers, wage progressions, skills utilization, job redesign. What I'm going to do is take you into a bit of a deep dive on the skills framework. So I'll probably touch upon these only at a surface level at this point. But what's most important is who's involved in this process. And it's kind of a commonly known fact that in Singapore the government runs a lot like a corporate, right? Which also means that it's exceedingly consumer focused. So every time there is a discussion, there's a question about if a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old who's in school wants to look at a career path and say, I want to be somebody who enters the food services, I want to work in a central kitchen. What kind of career pathways are available to me? Whatever we produce as an output needs to be easily consumable by that kind of population. At the same time, you have possibly a different view of the same information, where employers getting to see how is it that they can put programs in place and move people up. Education and training providers who tie in with saying what are the skills that employers really need. And of course, government unions, professional bodies, there are bodies like the Economic Development Board, the EDB, SPRING, and you can't again underestimate the importance of these bodies in actually pushing some of the agenda and changing practices in the industry. So what's critical therefore to see is that these four stakeholders are consistently represented throughout every stage of the process. And I'm just going to tell you a bit about how that happens, right? So obviously individuals, they have to invest in their own skills training. You've heard a little bit about skills futures credits. That is a form of training kind of subsidy that's available to people to be able to upskill themselves. For employers, it's very clear it's in terms of developing employee skills. And I think the government's very conscious of the fact that a lot of large employers may already have a lot of sophisticated systems in place. So the aim is really to support the small and medium enterprises by providing them with a framework that they can basically lift and use and adapt to their needs, where they don't have the resources to invest in frameworks like this. Of course, education training providers, I think it's one of the few places in the world where I've seen as strong an interaction between academia and the industry in terms of what's really needed from employers. And finally, unions, professional bodies really look at what are the skill gaps and therefore what are the specific initiatives that we need to be taking. I'll just pick up a very, very small part of the skills framework development process that we've been through. And it might just give you a sense of how this work happens. So the industry manpower plan we talked about was, future of the sector, demand and supply. Every time the government puts out a bid and they use consultants to develop the skills frameworks for some of the industries, there is a requirement that your skill framework is not valid. Hence, you will not get paid if you do not have 50% representation from the industry to endorse this framework. And I think it's a very, very telling metric in terms of saying these are the final consumers of our product and therefore they need to be okay with it and they need to have said that this meets my standards. And how that therefore comes in is when we talk about the skill framework development process, it's hugely focused on also emerging skills. So there is an entire section where we say, okay, this is what's happening today, but what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years? And there are skills that get articulated to a fairly detailed degree to which training providers can kind of tie up their program offerings, and they can take inputs to actually say what is it, how is it that we need to change some of our offerings. The validation process is probably where the strength lies. I've been in a room where we were discussing the marine and offshore engineering sector, building a skills framework for that. We had shipyard owners, we had large shipyard representatives, we had professors from polys and from the ITEs to actually provide people to these employers, and there was a very, very healthy debate which came up, which was really when they were reviewing the career map. He said there was a view that an IT graduate or a poly graduate should come in at a certain level, and the industry was very strong in its feedback in saying, you know what, realistically they don't, because they can't do the job. So we can't bring them in at that level. And what came out as a result of that discussion was a couple of separate meetings, but also a recognition of the fact that the institutions would relook at their curriculum, would see if there's anything that needed to happen to augment it. Because at the end of the day, you can't force an employer to say, you have to take my people at this level. It's difficult, you can try, but more often than not, a private sector employer, at least, it's difficult to push that through. So that's really where the strength of the system came through, because the whole tripartite model that Gilbert referred to comes out very strongly when finally you have endorsement for this framework, where people are bought into it and they agree to kind of use this as a common language. And then of course there's the adoption part of things, which is linkages and subsidies and things like that, which are probably focusing a little less on. So I think that was probably the most compelling thing for us, or for me to see as an outsider to the system, in terms of how this process to skill development was really run. Now, very quickly, I won't belabor the point on the next section. You've heard a lot about it, and again, I'm sure people know a lot more than I do. But there is a challenge of population. It is difficult to pick up a system that is effectively implemented in Singapore and transported wholesale, or even in a large degree, to an Indian context. There is obviously the challenge of the political system, not least of which is the fact that skills is on a concurrent list, which means that both the national government and state governments have a say in it. And at the end of the day, there's also a question of how much money do you have to spend on initiatives like this. The Skills Future credit is rather generous, and so it makes a big difference when you're able to actually incentivize lifelong learning and skill development. And that results in some of the outputs that you see in terms of the human capital index. So what I'm trying to think about really was then, why does some of that happen? And again, we've talked about the Indian education system. I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time on it. But what it leads to is, in general, a devaluation of qualification. Because there are so many graduates, the quality of a graduate is a questionable quality in that sense. Simple things like in our firm, in our consulting firm in Singapore, we hire undergraduates. In India, we only hire MBAs. We probably hire from the top 3 schools in business schools in India. In Singapore, we would be spreading that net much wider and going to at least 5 or 6 different places from where we do our graduate. And the reason for that is really because there's also a supply-demand thing. You have that many MBAs who will apply for our jobs in India, and therefore it becomes easier to pick from there. And that's really the employer's reaction, so to speak, right? Selection processes, hiring managers actually have KPIs. So when I was hiring in India, your premium institute hiring is a KPI, which means you would actually target to go to the top institutes, because you know that there is a certain level of selection that has already happened at that level, so your risk is lower. Obviously, multiple lengthy selection processes, very conservative ratios. 1,000 people will apply for a job and 5 people will get selected. Those are the kind of ratios we look at. And then there's a lot of money spent on onboarding. So Tata Consultancy Services, massive IT service provider in India, runs at least 2 batches of 100 plus people every year in their campus, where they're training people not just on coding, but on some very basic engineering implementations. And so, because this whole parallel system of onboarding is being put up, what corporates will do is impose bonds, or say that, we don't value the entry-level skill you come with because we have to reskill you anyway. And what that then does is, obviously, when you get to development, there's little investment on development of people. And so the second tier of institutes will basically want to poach from the TCSs or whatever, once those people have been developed in a couple of years' time. So really the question was, is there anything at all that can be learned? And that can be transferable from one to the other? I think one of the key ones was really the harmonized, coordinated effort across stakeholders. The fact that each and every one of these parties are working together and involved in this process. The second, really that break between, first you study, then you earn kind of a model. Because at the end of the day, it makes education unaffordable for a large proportion of the population. And finally, the whole idea that you don't have to finish your learning by the time you're 25 years old and then get into the workforce. The fact that if you have to break up a qualification or a diploma that would normally have been 2 years into a 5-year part-time, that's not seen as a stigma or a challenge in terms of implementing at an individual level. So that's pretty much it from my end. I guess we take some questions now. So happy to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. The question about transferability to India is really important, and I think that the conceptual problem is for most countries who are in this skills development game is how do you move from a low skills equilibria to intermediate and higher skills equilibria, and what are the levers that you have to make that movement, and that different countries have different levers. But a key element of Singapore has been the multi-stakeholder involvement. I mean, every board is tripartite, there's always people there. And I think we don't necessarily have that in India, or we don't necessarily have that in China either. But there are you can abstract from that, in fact, figure out how do we get this coordination mechanism going to sort of, to function as a lever to improve from a low skills to a high skills executive. Okay, so the floor is open for questions. We are following Dr. Subbarao's method of collecting 3 questions and having the panelists answer, and then we'll collect 3 more after that. Yeah, so 1, 2.
I have a question for Dr. Zhang. I think it was fascinating for me to learn because I've researched online, but haven't got a first account of how the system works in China. The 2 systems you spoke about, I wanted to better understand the physical infrastructure of the institutes, right, where the training happens. Is that developed with the industry in the case of MOE, and is it purely government in the case of the Ministry of Labour? What is the kind of equipment, the trainers, what is their involvement in that, in setting up the labs? And also I want to better understand who pays for the training. So how does it work in your system?
I don't know whether it's for Gilbert or Vidisha, but you talked about some committee for the future economy, and you talked about some industry manpower plan. It just sounds like industrial planning to me, right? So are you trying to predict where jobs will be? Because, we've tried to sort of, does supply create its own demand? Or, because, we've had some bad experiences with industrial policy in India, and so we've sort of, all the 20 reports of countries that we've studied, UK in 2010, US, Japan, I mean, they have the efficacy of palm reading or astrology, right? So, and you have, so obviously I understand we have to prepare people for something, but if you precisely seem to target industries, then the track record hasn't been good. So has your track record been good, maybe, in Singapore?
One more question? Dependent.
Thank you. The questions for all 3 panelists, but the first one follows directly from Mr. Vidisha Mehta's observation. This one's still for Ms. Mehta and Mr. Tan. So I taught briefly at UNICEF, which has been reincarnated as Singapore University of Social Sciences. And we used to interview students, every student coming in. And when I'm looking at the series, these kids are coming in with amazing qualification. I was teaching finance, and it was utterly banal relative to what they were doing. Microbiology, applied mechatronics, and host of very fascinating courses. And when I turned around and asked them, why are you doing this? You've done something so fascinating, exciting, and Singapore's growing. Look at Biopolis, the whole type of stuff. Without exception, it was, there are no jobs there. It's, we were told something, but it has not panned down. There may be a selection bias out there, but it also alludes to the labor market signaling failure or trying to, it's almost like reading the tea leaves in a sense. So, and another episode, you take Uber rides, for instance, you alluded to the gig economy. A lot of them have been laid off, and a couple of instances, this was striking for me, before enough, that they did not know a lot about where to turn next. And sometimes people are in their mid-30s or early 40s. So there appears to be a signaling or a communication issue as well to let you know with skills future there, and there are other opportunities. So the reality, the grassroots seems to be a bit different from what's envisioned. So whether you could share your observations on that. Dr. Zhang, as Kuruvilla pointed out, sorry, I'm taking time. It's fascinating to see ground level research. It's a rarity. I just want to find out why the Ministry of Labour program, which is specific, what are the reasons underlying failure? You mentioned is it inflexible? Is there partnership with industry to find out, large industrial employers to find out where the needs lie? And I was curious about the recommendation. What do you believe civil society might provide the answer? Thank you.
Okay, so it might be best if Dr. John responded to the two questions for you, and then both of you can respond to the general questions from Malaysia and Vidisha. Okay?
Thank you very much for the questions. These are really good questions. About the sort of training facilities. So what's happening in these kind of programs is that the firm initiate the collaboration and try to find a collaborative school, right? And then they set up a training center, and then really imitating what's really going on, what's the real workplaces in the firms. So they set up a practical center on campus, and they transfer all the technology, all the equipment, and they send some technicians in their firms to teach in those centers. So these are really workplace-like training places where the training actually takes place. And in terms of the cost-sharing structure, the state is paying through subsidizing the public schools, right? Because these are public schools. So this actually has a legitimacy issue, right? If the training is exclusively focused on that individual employer, if it's only that individual employer is externalizing their internal training, there is a legitimacy issue if the public should fund this kind of training, right? And this is the dominant model nowadays happening in China, that they are using actually the state money to train for those individual employers based on whatever they need. The students, the trainees often bear significant costs because they do internship, apprenticeship in the firms with only minimal wages. So they bear low wages as their costs. And firms also pay as they transfer knowledge to these programs. So that's the cost sharing structure. Reasons underlying the failure of the labor ministry. Another related and often asked question is why they take really different approaches. Why the labor ministry likes the centralized model. Why the education ministry took a decentralized approach, right? So, in general, if you look at government behaviors, the ministries always take centralized approach to managing their projects, and they think this is the best way to enforce their central policies, strictly following what they think. So if the centralized model is the default, the question becomes why the education ministry took a decentralized approach. I think the reason is that the education ministry actually, they do not historically have that connection with the industry. So they don't think they can really control the industry, so they really allow you guys to leave it to you guys. You guys work out by yourself. Leave it to the schools to find their others in your specific context. Whereas the labor ministry, they traditionally have strong connection with the industry. They're confident enough that they can control everything. So that's why they are willing to use their traditional default centralized approach to the reform. And actually that became the problem for their feeling. That's why.
I have limited knowledge about the CFE, so I'm not going to make a lot of comments about that. What I do know is that, again, representation from the industry works out pretty fine, and the representation from the industry is pretty high. But it is a valid point of saying, is there an attempt to predict the future? To some extent, I would say yes. But there is also a much stronger agenda for what is called the lead agency to actually drive a certain agenda for the industry. So I'll just take an example to talk about that. So when we were developing the framework for the central kitchen part of food services, this ranges from a shop where you've got 5, aunties who really are not looking for career progression, and they're just there and they cook and they supply to semi kind of processed stuff to restaurants all over, to the likes of Red Dog, which the central kitchen of which really looks like a space shuttle. So that's the degree of variance in the sophistication. And as we were going through this process, we did have a lot of feedback from some of the SMEs saying, I don't need my technicians or my, because actually it's not really now about being a cook, it's about being a technician. So I don't need my technician to understand electronics simply because, I'm using this because I get some sort of, a rebate of the labor that I employ, and it's going to continue to be labor intensive. And therefore, what's the point of teaching them these new skills, and why should I even validate it? And at that point in time, in those workshops, what was interesting is Spring would be present as a member, which is basically the Association for Small and Medium Enterprises. And they were very strong in their view of saying that may be the case today, but you may not be able to do this tomorrow. So therefore, automation is not something you really have a lot of choice about. You're going to need to do it. I think that is the other big difference really to see, which is the ability or the extent to which government and lead agencies drive the agenda when it comes to employment and the influence that they have over the employers. And hence they are able to actually say that you need to do this, but at the same time they would try to seek opinions, and the risk that you run is then you're very reactive, because you're trying to meet a labor market demand issue, and you're not thinking about supply 10 years out where the demand may not even be there today. So there is a challenge, and I think when we talk to representatives from these various agencies, they talk about two things. One big one is Singapore's one on productivity. They've done really well here. But the challenge is innovation. Because up till now, productivity worked at attracting a lot of investment, but there is a challenge because people tend to think in a very process-oriented manner, which then has its drawbacks and benefits. And hence the long-term implication is really in terms of the signaling in future to the labour market. But I do need to say that this is a new initiative. So the IMPs started only in about 2012. There was a precursor to it, but in its current shape and form, it's still about 5 to 7 years old. So as we're working with the system, there are drawbacks obviously that emerge, but there is a lot of responsiveness to listening to what those are, accepting those, and kind of changing what is
maybe to add on to I picked up three little points that I think are worth making. One, are we trying to predict? I think we need to plan. In Singapore, being a small country, with a bit more organized implementation, and planning actually is useful. The government, I spent 13 years in government before coming to the Employability Institute, launches planning committees every 3 to 5 years. I think the first one I got involved with was called the Committee for the Economic Review Committee in probably the late 1990 something, 2000. And then a few years later, we launched the Economic Strategies Committee, and it went on. And when I went overseas, when I came back, it was Aspire, focusing on schools, ITV programs, and became the National Productivity and Economic Innovation Committee Council, and became the Future Economic Committee that resulted in the Future Economics Council. I guess all this is the effort to know and to think, if we've got a small nation, a small people, a small space, how do we balance economic growth, which involves labor, productivity growth, and social growth, social cohesion. And in a small, limited city state that we're going to look at city issues as well as country issues, then how do we balance the economy and the social aspect of things? I think that's something which is always on government's mind. And I think ITN, having been through a number of countries, shows what the congruence and the focus that big agencies are now taking the lead in, and having everyone fall alongside, not behind, not in front, but alongside them to try to achieve. Again, it's in infancy. The first maps were not even called industry strategy, they were called something else, I can't remember what they were called. Under the National Productivity Council, we launched the first maps. They are now translated to call the industry transformation maps. And I think getting a lot more momentum going. I guess the proof of the pudding is in the taste. So how do we implement these maps in the challenge? We're moving from the traditional cook at the shop system to a central kitchen system results in a change of the entire mindset of how we deliver a meal to the customer. So how do we change that? All the way from employers who are typically SMEs who are very happy being chefs themselves to now running a business from manufacturing plant in the central kitchen to delivering the food service in the outlet store. So those are things that are always in mind. I guess being our size small, our integrated implementation methodology, so far we have kept Singapore reasonably successful in the past few years through such planning systems that we put in place. Will we continue to be successful? I think we must never be complacent to ensure that planning is sharp, incisive, accurate, and implementation is effective. Challenge. Productivity, while we've done okay, it's actually never been a good story. We were going about 4% every year until 20. We varies up and down based on economic cycles, but we typically get about 4% on average a year. And the 4% was mainly contributed through labor growth, not productivity growth. And so when the Ministry of Manpower cut the labor supply, the foreign contract controls and labor supplies, we immediately saw a negative productivity growth for a number of years. And finally, I think this year, 2016, we saw a turnaround to 0.5% of productivity growth. We hope that it's due to partial implementation of the transmission maps. We hope so. And that hopefully will continue. The second point on jobs, after I go through an exciting course, where are the jobs? I think that's a challenge in many countries because the education programs, it is resident in schools. The very fact that I need to plan the curriculum, build a faculty to deliver that, market the curriculum, do the recruitment, and then churn out a graduate or a diploma holder 5-6 years later, the jobs being shifted. And I think this pain will be more acute as we go to the future with job changes even faster. So really, how do we build a different education system where instead of front-loading everything into a school, how do we maybe front-load just 40% of the education in school, the skills education in school, have the 60% applied through the workplace learning, through on-continuing education. I think that's something we need to think about. And of course, we need the skill market. How long does it take for us to fine-tune an education or a skills learning program to keep pace with the learners? When ransomware, things like what hit the world, how fast could training programs, skill programs keep up to train people to prevent such things from happening or to recover from such incidents? This is worth thinking about. And then your last point on skills future, nice concept. Where do people go? How do we go? If I'm in need or something, where do I go to? So while we are small, we do have some communication challenges. The first successful case, I think, came about in Singapore a few years back, tried to implement this policy program called Pioneer Generation. So we went through a huge system of ambassadors on the ground, we got it communicated reasonably well. But Skills Future was a challenge. So our Deputy Prime Minister Kama has been speaking to a few agencies, including E2I, to ask us, how can we bring Skills Future better to the community? Because unlike Pioneer Generation, which is the one program, quite a specific, non-variation sort of program, Skills Future is a very broad concept, from guidance all the way to various study-to-work programs, to funding schemes, to so many maps, so many jobs. So it's a complicated program. So again, I would not want to steal DPM's thunder, but later in this year, we'll be announcing another initiative that will bring Skills Future knowledge on how to access help to the communities. So again, using part of the backbone of the Pioneer Generation, but a separate backbone focusing on skills, career guidance, and building really a network that can help people understand skills really better and get the help they need to understand where they are today with the community. So that should be coming up by late October.
Okay, so we have about 30 seconds, so I think we'll skip another round of questions. I just think this stuff is really interesting, but when you sort of look across the world, so you have Singapore at one end where they are constantly planning, strategizing, getting information out, everybody's on board, it's a small place, that unifies, a lot of people into the same framework. It's very active, hands-on focus on skills development. On the other extreme, you have the United States, which we leave it to the market, all the time. And there is no effort at planning, and no calling on industrial policy, no picking winners, nothing of that kind. And so somewhere in the middle is the UK, which sort of, on the one hand, privatizes a lot of these efforts, but holds the private sector accountable in a pretty reasonable way. And I think that where India is going is, sort of saying public provision but private production, right? And so one of the key issues in that private production is how do you hold the private sector accountable? And I think, so there are lessons I think can be learned from going beyond Singapore, because not everything in Singapore can easily be replicated in India. So with that, I've been told this is it, so this is lunchtime, so head towards lunch.
Thank you, Professor Kuruvilla. I would now like to invite Professor Kuruvilla to present some tokens of appreciation to our speakers. Firstly, Mr. Gilbert Tan. Next, Dr. Hao Zhang. And Ms. Vidisha Mehta. I would now like to hand over to Dr. Randhawa for some brief closing remarks before lunch.
Thank you. I'm not going to stand in the way of you and lunch. Very quick observation. This is structured as a workshop, and what we're really hoping for is an open engagement with a lot of questions. These are all outstanding issues, pressing issues, not just in India, in other countries. Dr. Krishna's superb address set the tone, and you had an excellent session. We do actively look for and hope for participation at your end. Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists as well.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now adjourn for lunch in the foyer outside. We request that you please be seated by 1:45 p.m. for the next session.